Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower clear.
But other sightings apparently were taken more seriously.
And one in particular, an incident called the Rendlesham Forest Incident, also known as Britain's Roswell. This was in 1980, shortly after Christmas, when a few American airmen who were stationed in the UK reported seeing a UFO.
A huge, solid, diamond-shaped object they described as 100 foot long, hovering silently in the sky above them.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone, whatever that means.
Understands UFOs are real. This is a technology that is so far beyond anything that we have.
Reportedly appear to exhibit unusual flight characteristics, appear to demonstrate advanced technology.
Arrow is the culmination of decades of DoD, intelligence community, and congressionally directed efforts to successfully resolve UAP encountered first and foremost by U.S. military.
What is up, guys? Welcome back to Disclosure Team here on YouTube. I really appreciate you guys being here for the live interview. This is our weekly interview, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation today because this story broke, I think it was 3 months ago yesterday, the David Grusch story, the big bombshell story in the Debrief by Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal. And I remember back then when it broke, I was scrambling. I emailed Ralph and said, Ralph, I really would love to speak to you about this. And of course, I'm sure Ralph was getting hundreds of emails from left, right, and center about it. So I think this is a really good time now that kind of things have died down a bit. We had the story, we had the hearings, and things are just kind of simmering at the moment. So this is a perfect opportunity to speak to Ralph and kind of dig back into that story. Now, I only have Ralph for about 45 minutes, so we are going to jump straight into it. But as always, guys, please keep the live chat respectful, and everything will be all good. So let's not waste any more time. And I'm really happy to welcome Ralph Blumenthal. Ralph, very good to see you.
Pleasure to be here.
Good to see you. Let's jump straight into it, Ralph. I think the very first question is, we had this bombshell story in the Debrief. Intelligence officials say that US has retrieved craft of non-human origin, a really bold statement there. But let's talk about David Grusch. When did you first hear that name?
I heard it from Leslie Kean, my partner in a lot of the UFO stories that we've done for the Times, mainly, and some other publications. And she told me she'd been in touch with this intelligence official for some time, and he was waiting to come forward. He had very high-level representation. He had a lawyer who was the first Inspector General of the intelligence community, Chuck McCullough, a very high-level guy. And he was telling an amazing story. So we worked together on a lot of these things, and we figured we got to break this story.
Yeah, and I mean, like, we heard rumors, I think, in the community that a whistleblower was ready to come forward. And then there were leaks that maybe it would come forward in the Washington Post or even the New York Times, but that didn't seem to be the case. Are you able to kind of explain what actually happened there?
Yeah. Once we had the story, Leslie and I took it to the New York Times first. We didn't have it nailed down yet. We had a little part of the story. So it was kind of an early stage, and they weren't ready for it. They passed on it at that point. So we took it to the Washington Post, and they were digging into it. It was taking a long time because they're very rigorous. We understand that, mainstream media just do a lot of checking. We were going through the process, but then David Grusch's name leaked out on the internet, and it was very dangerous for him. He was already receiving a lot of threats. He was getting retaliation contrary to the whistleblower statute, which supposedly protects people like him. So it got very dangerous for him. We had to get the story out quickly. The Post really wasn't ready at that point to move on it, so we took it to the Debrief, where we both published before. They have their own rigorous fact checking. It's a very professional, a website with intelligence people, defense people, etc. So we put it out quickly.
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about checks and everything there. What was your vetting process, or Leslie's, when it came to
both of us had been in this game a long time, and we know we would never even bring it to a publication unless we checked it out thoroughly. It has to be on the record. We don't use, anonymous sources. We need the backup records. David Grusch, for example, furnished his military records, the ones that were not classified. We checked him out with other people who were on the record. So we went through, a really rigorous process to check, because, a lot of people say a lot of things, as you know, and there's a lot of stuff on the internet that's not checked out. But our reputations depend on, checking out the stories we tell, and David certainly checked out.
Was there anything along the way that made you kind of question it at all, or was it just, everyone was willing to kind of, back him up?
Well, everyone was willing to back him up. I mean, if we had any doubts whatsoever, we wouldn't have gone with the story. I mean, there are other whistleblowers waiting in the wings that we're hoping to report on, but we're in the process of checking everything out. So until we do that, we're not going to, break the story. But certainly there was nothing contrary to what he said was true. And I should say that, there have been efforts made to discredit him, and including his service in Afghanistan, which resulted in sort of PTSD, which he was very forthcoming about. He was a combat veteran in Afghanistan, and like many troops there, he suffered some, emotional crises as a result, which he shared with us. We knew about that. But enemies of him came forward later, after we broke the story, after he went public, after he testified, to try to discredit him. But in our view, that was no discrediting. I mean, he was a combat veteran who suffered crises like so many other troops.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I think if you look at the percentage for returning troops from combat, the percentages are really high, unfortunately, for PTSD. I mean, let's just touch upon that a little bit. I mean, why do you think these publications, and I'm going to name names, specifically The Intercept here, why do you think they used that to kind of, smear him?
Well, there's a lot of so-called skeptics. Don't get me started on skeptics, because it's a skeptic to me. A real skeptic is somebody who looks over the evidence and, asks tough questions. We're not against that. We're for that. But a lot of these people don't do their homework. They don't look at the evidence. They're quick with, explanations. Oh, this is, sleep paralysis. This is a hallucination. This is sexual trauma. I mean, nonsense stuff, which John Mack, who I, wrote a biography about, a psychiatrist, he dealt with that too. And he disposed of all those theories very, very easily. I mean, there are people who just want to knock these stories down. But luckily, I mean, I think we were solid in our reporting, and it didn't faze him at all.
Yeah. And let's speak speculatively here. What do you think John Mack would make of everything that's happening right now?
Oh, boy. Well, John Mack, as you know, was a Harvard psychiatrist who got very interested through Bud Hopkins in these stories that people were telling that was totally outlandish, encounters with alien beings and, experiments on the ships. And he couldn't figure out what to make of it. And he quickly found, by talking to these people, that they were not crazy. They were not looking for publicity. On the contrary, they were running away from publicity. They were very shy. And they themselves didn't know what to make of it. And by the way, there was no rhyme or reason why certain people were picked for these things. And it included children as young as 2 years old, little kids who were never to the movies. They didn't see, Close Encounters. They were not reciting stories from books they'd read. They couldn't read, but they were telling stories of things that they said happened to them. So all that convinced John Mack that, that there was some other strange phenomenon, at work here. Which, look, we don't know. We don't know the answers. We don't deal with aliens in our stories for the Debrief and the New York Times. We just don't know. We raise the questions, but these objects certainly are real.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you raised a good point there. You don't talk about aliens. We're talking about UAP, unidentified objects in the sky. I mean, so many people across the board, whether it be the general public or mainstream media, they hear that phrase UFO or UAP and they jump straight to aliens. I mean, do you see that changing at all? Do you see it becoming more serious?
We're taking it one step at a time. Obviously, the question has to come up at some point. Well, what are these things? Are they intelligent? Where do they come from? What do they want? But that's the next step. The first big milestone, you could say, was getting the government to acknowledge, which it did now in the first UAP report in 2021. It said these objects are most certainly real. And that's a big leap, by the way, for the Pentagon, because they spent decades downplaying these sightings and telling people they were crazy if they reported it, telling military personnel not to report it because you'll be sent to a psychiatrist, telling commercial pilots don't report it. So now they're saying for the first time, these things are real, but we don't know anything more than that. By the way, it's not just in the air. They've been seen going into and out of the water, which is a real mind blower. So again, we know more than we did before because they're great. There's video, there's thermal imaging devices, records, radar tracks. So we know that part in terms of some of their operations, but we don't know much more than that.
That's right. Yeah, we do have these images and videos that have now been put out on the Arrow website this week as well. Have you, in your kind of conversations, let's say behind the scenes with people like David Grusch, have you been made aware of any videos that aren't public? I'm not asking if you've seen them. I'm just saying, are you aware of any?
Well, that's a good question. We know, the New York Times, based on our reporting, put out 3 videos.
Yeah.
Which have become famous now. I mean, every time they do a story anytime anybody does a story about, UAP, they put up the videos that we got first, the New York Times, and put up on the website. But these are only fragments of much longer videos, we understand. And there are many more videos that the Pentagon has that they're not releasing that are classified. So we don't know what those show. People say, well, why are the pictures so unclear? Well, these are the only pictures that we've been given, but there are others that may be a lot clearer. We don't know. So, for sure, there's a lot more evidence out there that the government is holding, confidentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's just jump back to David Grusch. As you were kind of digging into this story and hearing, the claims that he was making, when you initially heard that, he had this direct knowledge of legacy programs hidden somewhere within, the US government and agencies, what were your initial thoughts on that? And how did your thoughts change the more that he spoke?
Well, we were blown away. I mean, we had done a very early story for the New York Times on briefings for a congressional staff that mentioned retrieved objects, which was really probably the first time that got into the New York Times. It was a very carefully written story, Leslie and I did. But we had briefing slides and we had accounts from Eric Davis, who gave the briefings to Congress. So now this was something much more detailed, that here we have a very high-level intelligence guy saying that he knew, based on his contacts in the intelligence world, that the government, our government, and presumably, by the way, other government, foreign governments, have retrieved intact craft. So when he told us that, that was a mind blower, and he subsequently told it to Congress in open session. So we were, amazed. We'd heard these stories before, but here he was saying it on the record that he knew that the government was holding, and maybe private contractors too, actually intact craft.
Yeah. There were other intelligence officials in your story that you reported on, but active and retired, with knowledge of these programs. They corroborated this information. Are you able to talk upon that a little bit?
Yeah, well, David Grusch was very forthright in his conversations with us and with members of Congress when he testified. He did not himself see these craft or lay hands on them, but he told Congress that he knew who had. And he offered to give Congress the names of the people who could testify firsthand. He also offered to tell Congress where these craft were being stored, which is pretty amazing. Now, we don't know. We haven't seen them. But that seems to me to be a great offer if Congress avails itself of that, and no reason why it shouldn't, to find out who's holding these craft, where. So, it's totally astounding that this information came out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the people that mentioned in your article was Nell. So are you able to just kind of give like how he fits into this story?
Yeah, there were people, colleagues. Again, before we would put, David Grusch, make him the centerpiece of our story, we went to other colleagues in the intelligence field and the military and asked for their views of him, and they knew him, and they vouched for him. So Nels was one of the officers colleagues who spoke highly of David Grusch and buttressed the reporting. By the way, what gave us additional confidence was that Grusch was required, actually, as a member of the intelligence establishment, to clear any public statements with the Pentagon Office of Pre-Publication Review. So he did that, and he told them that he was talking to reporters, to me and Leslie, and he was going to tell them this, and that. He wrote it all out, and they had no objection. Now, that doesn't mean that they, agreed with him or that they substantiated what he said, but they had no objection to him saying it. So that added another level of authentication in our view. That was very important, that, that the Pentagon intelligence community knew what he was going to say and did not object on security grounds, at least. So we found that very compelling.
Yeah, and I think it's important to mention there the DOPSA process, as you did. And one thing that he did mention, what Grusch did mention in one of the small few interviews that he did do, is that he mentioned this 1933 case from Italy. And I'm surprised to hear that he was actually allowed to talk about one incident, which, to be honest, I've looked into it. It is a bit controversial. So, I mean, how does that kind of fit in that he's able to talk about one case in particular, but nothing else?
Well, he did mention that case. He said that Italy under Mussolini, this was before World War II, had actually taken possession of a off-world craft and turned it over to the U.S., as I remember the story. That's all he said. What happened to that craft, where it went, who has custody of it, we don't know. But he did say that there is a new Cold War, going on between adversarial powers like Russia, China, and us to retrieve these craft, to get as much information as possible, reverse engineer them for our own defense needs, which is also astonishing. Again, we'd heard stories all along that Russia and China were pursuing the same investigations as we were, but he laid it out as a Cold War struggle. So that's also fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, another name mentioned in the article was Jonathan Gray, someone else that we'd not heard that name before in the community. And he made some pretty bold statements, actually corroborating that, in fact, these programs did exist as well. And did you speak to him directly for the article?
Leslie did. Leslie had a very revealing conversations with him. I myself did not, but she did. And, there's another thing that came out. He uses that name in his agency, in his intelligence agency. Okay. That's his official name in the agency. Whether that's his real name outside the agency, probably not. But somebody tried to make some, headway with that and say, well, it's not his real name. Well, it's his name in the agency, and he stood behind that. So he's a real person. We've looked at his records as well. He exists. He is who he says he is. And a very high level clearance. And it was another, confirmation, verification of what David Grusch said.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know David Grusch was working, or we learned through your story that he worked for the UAP Task Force, and
He did.
actually he really seemed to be making some progress there with his investigations. But since then we've had the AOIMSG office now up into Arrow, and there seems to be some disconnect. It seemed that the UAPTF were making headway. Here we are now in 2023 with Arrow, and the director, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, is kind of playing down that anything even points towards anything off-world. How does that kind of figure?
Yeah, you have to parse those statements from the Pentagon very carefully. Many of them are very artfully worded. I would say non-denial denials. They've always taken this line, even when they were discrediting Lou Elizondo, the first head of ATIP, or started under other names, but they were just discrediting him. So there's obviously something going on in the Pentagon where they're sort of undercutting some of these disclosures. And if you look at the first the early testimonies of the congressional hearings, the first one in 50 years took place in 2021, I believe. Pentagon officials were saying, we are not aware of any, off-world vehicles. Well, if you read that very carefully, we are not aware. That doesn't mean that the Pentagon is not aware or that other people are not aware. So it is very strange that they have gone out of their way to cast doubt on the information that they themselves possess.
Yeah, do you think Arrow is just being purposefully slowed down in their progress? Because we know early on Dr. Kirkpatrick didn't have the access that he required, and it seems there were funding issues, and it's almost been a year and they just don't seem to be up to speed. Do you think that that's on purpose?
It's a good question. What we found is that this information about UAPs is super highly classified and very, very carefully held. And many of the people who are officially trotted out as spokespeople, not read into the program. So they can say in fully good conscience, we don't know this or that, or we are not aware of this or that. They are not aware. But what Leslie and I have found out in our reporting is that these special groups exist all sort of squirreled away inside the government, deep inside the government. One doesn't necessarily know what the other one is doing, but they are very, very tightly controlled and on a need-to-know basis. And that is where the information is held about these recoveries from everything we've heard, these craft retrievals. And it extends to private business, to private defense contractors who are not amenable, by the way, to the Freedom of Information laws. So if you query the government and say, are you in possession of this? The government might answer no, but you can't. There's no Freedom of Information process for private industry. So you can't go to Lockheed, for example, and say, are you in possession of any off-world craft? Because they have no legal need to respond. So, but as I said, what the whole system is stovepiped so that one doesn't know what the other is doing. Even presidents of the United States are not normally read into these programs. George H.W. Bush, we understand, did demand, and he had a CIA background, to hear about it. But presidents don't necessarily know all the information and where it's being kept. So that's how super secret it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned in there Lockheed. If you were to speculate again, let's say, would you say that they were most likely the private aerospace contractor that would have some knowledge on these programs more than others?
You hear that name a lot. People mention that. Little bits and pieces have trickled out, but again, they have not been, forthcoming. It is the biggest secret that the government has, and private enterprise, industry has. So they're not going to, blab it around. But Lockheed certainly is one of the companies that I think Congress knows about this too, by the way, and I think they will be zeroing in on Lockheed and other contractors.
Yeah, that's very interesting that you say that. So I'll just touch upon that a bit more. It does seem to be that a lot of the time we hear from members of Congress, whether it be from Senate, the House, or even the members of the Gang of Eight, they seem to play it down an awful lot. Do you think they are actually investigating this through the Congress right now, and they're just waiting to see what they find?
Yes, some are. I mean, the Tim Burchett and Representative Luna from Florida, and a number of representatives, particularly Senator Rubio, are very interested in this topic, and they've been quite aggressive. Actually, Tim Burchett and Luna and some of the others were turned away when they tried, by their account, at the hearing, actually, when they tried to check out some of these stories. They went to military bases and were turned away. And these are members of Congress, you know. So now David Grusch has said, well, I'm going to give you names of people who have information. I'm going to give you the names of bases where these things are supposedly being secretly held. And now you can go back and try to get access. So that's how secretly this process has been operating. But I think the members of Congress, like Burchett, I mean, are really determined to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, one thing that I find when we talk about language and semantics and wording of things, when I read this small sort of section in your article, is that Grusch asserted that these legacy programs were concealed within multiple agencies nesting UAP activities, almost suggests that there's more than one program. Does that kind of fit right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think there are multiple programs. I think they're extremely well hidden. And by the way, he said to Congress, he really threw down the gauntlet to Congress and said, look, it's American taxpayer money that is being mishandled because the money is being shifted around for things that it was not authorized for. So he thought there was some criminal aspect to the handling of funds for these programs that Congress should look into. And he said to Congress, he said it right out. He said, you have been lied to, and it is your job, he said to Congress, to get at the truth and to untangle this mess and to expose these lies. So he really threw down the gauntlet to them in a public way. And now, look, he also testified in private, 1,100 pages worth of classified testimony David Grusch gave. We don't know what's in that. So he could have said a lot more privately when he was testifying to Congress, in classified session. So that would be very interesting to know what he said there.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned there 1,100 pages. Do we know if that included anything like photos or videos alongside that?
We don't know. I mean, he did say he did not himself inspect these crafts. So
sure.
It would all be secondhand. But, he had very good connections in the intelligence community. So if he heard something from somebody, chances are that it was very interesting.
Yeah. And do you feel, David Grusch mentioned he'd interviewed over 40 witnesses, some working directly within these programs. And since then, we've had researchers within our community, such as James Fox, say that they've also spoken to some of these people and even recorded some of this testimony themselves on video for potential release at some point. Do you think it might take something like that to kind of break the story? Is the government thing really just not going to take us to that final step?
Well, I think it's going to move forward, and I think it will happen because there are other whistleblowers in the wings. We know that. There are other witnesses. As I said before, David Grusch said he would furnish Congress the names of people with direct knowledge. So there's the potential for a lot more information, and presumably, photographic evidence, reports, things like that, videos, the ones that were not released. As I said, we saw the 3 that were a little tip of the iceberg. So there's a tremendous amount of information that is not being shared. And, you can argue, well, how much of it is necessary for the nation's defense and how much is the government just hoarding information that the American people have a right to know.
Yeah. So, a month or two after your story, we had the House, the subcommittee within the House Oversight Committee hold this hearing with David Grusch alongside Ryan Graves and Commander Fravor. And for me personally, it seemed to a lot of the people on both sides, the bipartisan issue, that they came very prepared with very good questions. What was your general view on that?
Absolutely. I mean, this is one issue that seems to straddle the the bipartisan divide. And that's very encouraging. It seems to me there is no political, benefit to one side or the other from this issue. Everyone can agree it's something that's very interesting. It's fascinating. It's obviously vital for national interest. It's something that the people, not only of America, but the world should know. If there's another intelligence out there, you're not giving away any secrets. You're not explaining how these craft are manufactured and, what the secret of their power is. You're not giving away that. You're just saying that we know from our intelligence and our, surveillance that these things are real. And so that information should be shared with the people of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that the Senate kind of reconvened after the summer break yesterday. I think the House reconvened next week. I personally have heard murmurings of a new hearing, whether it be under the auspice of the Armed Services Committee or the Intelligence Committees. Is that something you've heard about at all?
I haven't followed, the latest, but I'll tell you this, that there's a lot more interest in Congress now in coming forward and having hearings on this. There was a time when the Pentagon browbeat elected officials to the point where they were afraid to ask questions because they were afraid of being accused of being nuts. Basically, they made fun of Jimmy Carter when he said he had seen a UFO. So any public official who would dare to say that this is a real issue or these are questions was basically shamed into silence. Well, that's not happening anymore, or at least not to that same extent. Pilots are being told to come forward. Military personnel are being encouraged to come forward. So I think, again, to choose an old image, the genie's been let out of the bottle. You can't get it back in. So once that shame starts to diminish, more and more members of Congress and the public will be willing to come forward with information.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's talk about Grusch and his reprisals just for 1 second. There's something that I was confused around for a while is that, we have Grusch originally approached the DOD Inspector General, I believe, and that is where somehow his name got leaked into the intelligence community, which caused these reprisals. And now we hear about an IGIC investigation. So can you just confirm, is the IGIC investigation about the reprisals, or is it about the information that Grusch has actually provided?
Well, I think I'm not absolutely clear on the timetable, but I know that after he came forward and gave this confidential testimony, 1,100 pages, he was subject to retaliation by his own account and his lawyer's account, to the point where he was really intimidated and for fear of his life. And, something very, very striking came out of that hearing. If you remember, he said that people who have seen, had sightings and encounters were threatened and sometimes were murdered. And somebody on the subcommittee asked him, murdered by who? By the aliens or by the military establishment? And he said both. Now that is an absolutely sensational allegation. And it was kind of dropped because clearly any details would have to be delivered in closed session. But I found that absolutely astonishing. And when I look back on the revelations of that hearing, that could be like number one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing David Grusch did talk about in the hearing and previously is that these things are some kind of dimensional entities, let's say. How does that fit in with what you've heard before when it comes to aliens and even going back to the work of John Mack?
Yeah, everyone is trying to figure out, look, if these things are aliens, how do they travel from the, millions of hundreds of millions, billions of light years across the universe to get here? So, it's a good question, but that has to do with the physics that we understand today. So, and just the other day in the New York Times, there was a story about how physics is grappling with questions that they never thought they'd have to deal with before, that changed the entire timetable of the Big Bang. So there's things that don't fit anymore, like the universe apparently came together much quicker than scientists had long thought. So we're constantly changing our hypotheses, because they are hypotheses. It's not proven. So one of the hypotheses is that, well, maybe they don't travel for millions of light years to get here. Maybe they are existing in some other parallel dimension right with us, which is one of the things John Mack thought. I mean, initially, John Mack took a very conventional view of the stories he was hearing, that these were spaceships and aliens were traveling across the cosmos to get here, and it was happening in real time. And, all this was absolutely real. And the more he investigated and thought about it, the more he realized it might be happening in another dimension. It's liminal. In other words, it exists on the border of, our reality and some other reality. It's much more complicated. And Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs, by the way, took a much more realistic approach and said, oh, no, this is happening in real time, absolutely, real events. And Mack wasn't sure. So what Grusch threw out was this theory that perhaps it was happening in some other dimension, which would explain how these things can just pop up and then disappear.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, I've just lost my spot here. Bear with me. Oh, I wanted to talk to you as a journalist, how the mainstream media picked up on the story, first of all, straight after the debrief story, but then sort of the way that they've kind of rolled with it. We've got people like News Nation who are almost doing daily reports on this, video reports on YouTube and stuff like that. But on the grand scheme of things, how do you think it's been in the mainstream media?
Well, the mainstream media has been slow on this topic. I think, we broke the first big story in December 2017 when we reported on ATIP, the Pentagon UFO Investigation Office, with Lou Elizondo. It had been going for a few years. Then it had been called OSAP originally. Then it became ATIP, but it was never public. And it was funded with $22 million in secret money obtained by Harry Reid, then the Senate Majority Leader. So until we broke that story, there was really very little reporting in mainstream media. That kind of opened the doors, I'm happy to say. And although the reporting has been also, unfortunately, kind of negative very often. That David Grusch, if you look back at the coverage of David Grusch's testimony, some of it was sort of snarky. And, it was pointed out again and again, which is true, that he did not lay hands on these craft. He didn't see them personally, but he was in a position to talk to a lot of people with more detailed information. That's also true. So, again, I think I'm lumping the mainstream media together here, but by and large, what we call the mainstream media, I think, has been kind of deliberately skeptical to the point of almost ignoring the revelations that have been made, or at least casting doubt on them. So it's good to be skeptical, but more and more people are coming forward with real information, credible people, and I think my guess that when the truth emerges more fully, that a lot of the mainstream media will look pretty foolish.
Yeah, it's funny though. You refer back to the 2017 article on ATIP and OSAP and Lou Elizondo, and that conversation is even still happening about whether ATIP was actually a program, whether Lou Elizondo was the kind of director or the kind of leader of that group. Just to touch back upon that, did you see evidence back then that ATIP was a real program? Maybe something
Absolutely.
that hasn't been made public.
Absolutely. I mean, we checked that out backwards and forwards before we would, elevate Lou Elizondo to the main part of our article. We checked him out very carefully. We saw his performance reports. We interviewed him at great length. We interviewed other people, colleagues. And then very distressingly, in the months and years after our article, there were little efforts to undercut him and to say, well, there was no ATIP, or it was really ORSAP. Yeah, it was ORSAP originally, became ATIP. But his story stood up. He is who he says he is. He has a lot more information that he's not disclosing because he's still covered by, confidentiality. He's very careful what he says, even though he's all over the media, talking about things. But it's really amazing how he's been able to be so public and yet to keep all the secrets that he clearly has. So what I said before, it's very distressing how parts of the government have tried to undercut this story and the people who are telling the truth about it. And they're abetted in some cases by journalists and others who have some agenda, who want to tear down the story or want to show that they're smarter than anybody else, so that they're super skeptical. As I said, it's okay to be skeptical, but you got to take account of what the facts are. You got to know what the stories are originally. And you can't deny facts. Facts are stubborn things. So I think, I take confidence and comfort in the fact that the truth is going to come out because it can't be hidden. And if it turns out that, we were completely fooled, and it's some other phenomenon that's totally explainable and, okay, we'll deal with that. But I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah. And do you think, again, speculation, do you think Lou and ATIP were aware of the legacy programs?
What do you mean by the legacy programs?
So these programs that exist within the kind of gray area between these agencies and the small needs.
They didn't know everything. They did not know everything. And I know that Lou and Chris Mellon tried to get access to some of the special access programs and could not. That's a very good question. And it shows how tightly held this information is, that even Lou Elizondo, as the head of the UAP Task Force, could not get access to some of this information. They were turned away. And the stories we hear, they're not alone. A lot of people, high-level government people, have tried to find out about this stuff and have been turned away, just like Tim Burchett and Representative Luna and others were turned away from the military bases where these things were supposedly, being held or going on. So just because you're in the government doesn't mean the doors fly open and you get the information you want. It is super, it's the biggest secret that the government has, bigger than nuclear technology. It's the biggest secret, we're told that again and again, that the government has, and it's protected with impenetrable layers of secrecy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's pretty clear. Absolutely. But one thing is not secret, Ralph, that I really want to touch upon before I let you go is that you and your lovely wife, Deborah, have written or co-authored a children's book, UFOs, Mysteries in the Sky. Can you please just tell us how that came about?
Yeah, well, my wife, Deborah, is a children's book writer, and she heard me on the phone doing all these interviews for my UFO reporting. And at one point she said, why don't we write a children's book? Because there's really nothing in the field of children's picture books for young readers that's factual. There's a lot of fantasy and ridiculous books about aliens, but a way to, introduce the subject to young readers. So I thought it was a very good idea, and we pitched the idea, and the University of New Mexico Press, which published The Believer, my biography of John Mack, liked the idea. They vetted it very carefully with committees of psychologists or so and asked a lot of good questions. But we wrote the book. It came out in April of this year. As you said, UFOs, OHS, Mysteries in the Sky. And it is a comfortable way, we hope, of introducing to families, to parents as well as kids, the idea that there are strange objects up there in the sky and sometimes under the water that are completely mysterious. They're apparently not of this world. They're not explainable as birds or planes or satellites. We don't know where they come from. We don't know who's running them, if any intelligence, but they're there, and they're a mystery. And we make a big point of that and saying, it is a mystery. We don't have the answers. But why would you write a book where you don't have the answers? Well, to introduce to kids the idea that you'll be hearing more about this, kiddies, as you grow up. And this is a way of introducing you to the subject. And the pictures we think are marvelous by a very good artist, Adam Gustafson, who illustrated one of my wife's other books. People seem to like the book a lot. It's gotten some nice attention, and we're very proud of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important, I think, as well, to do something like that. We often talk about how do we broach this subject with our friends and our family, and we don't obviously ask the question that much about how do we broach it with children. So, I mean, I think it's absolutely fantastic. It looks beautiful. So, yeah, I'd say congratulations to you both for putting that out there. Well, listen, Ralph, we've hit that 45 minutes. I am really just happy that I got to speak to you, and I really appreciate speaking with you, and I look forward to what you've got next.
Absolutely. Great questions, and we'll do it again.
Absolutely. Speak to you soon, Ralph.
Thank you.
Take care. Well, guys, yeah, it's unfortunate. We only get 45 minutes or short amounts of time with these guests. I'm going to hang around for a couple more minutes just to kind of broach, the chat. You guys are awesome. Yeah, really interesting. We do seem to be in this kind of slight down, slow moment at the moment, but, Congress are coming back. Yesterday, the Senate were back. Next week, the House are back. Let's see if we get inklings of more hearings. It's been a bit quiet, but yeah, guys, if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. Subscribe if you don't already. I really appreciate it. Yeah, for anyone, I'm just looking at the comments here. Do I have an email? Yeah, go to the About section here on the channel, and you'll find all links to all my social medias, my email, and everything like that. One thing I don't really do on this channel is plug things like merchandise and that, but I have been getting for the last year so many DMs and comments saying, Vinny, please release some merchandise. So I've done that. Again, the link's in the description with a discount code. I hate plugging stuff like that, but it's just to keep and please all the people that have been DMing me. Also, please follow me over on Instagram and Twitter. I'm still going to call it Twitter. Please follow me on the social medias just to keep up to date with everything that I've got going on. And then, yeah, next week, I'm actually flying out to the US for a week, so I won't be having a live interview, but I will be releasing an interview because I'm going to be speaking with Joe Mergia, UFO Joe, early next week. And then that'll come out a few days later, probably around Wednesday, Thursday next week. So, yeah, keeping on top of everything. I hope you guys are all good. If you did want to listen to this as audio only, it is available exclusively on Patreon. And that is as little as, I think it's $1 a month. And that just helps support what we're doing here. So go and check that out. All the links for everything you need to know on Disclosure Team, though, are in the description below. So, guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Shout out to Lara here, 21 months as a member. Thank you so much, Lara. I really appreciate the kind words. Take care, everyone. I'll see you soon. Goodbye.